Right now, sitting in your kitchen trash is something your fruit tree is desperate for. One match turns it into a compound so powerful it triggers any fruit tree to flower on command. More than 1,200 species respond to it. Farmers on 3 continents kept this secret for centuries until governments banned it and a billion-dollar industry sold you the replacement. Tonight, we're taking it back. Picture a mango grove in Zambales province on the western coast of the Philippines. The sun is going down. A farmer is piling damp rice straw, fallen leaves, and vegetable scraps from the evening meal into a low mound beneath the biggest tree in his orchard. He strikes a match. The pile catches. Then he smothers it with green cuttings and wet grass until the flame dies and thick white smoke begins curling upward through the branches. No chemical purchased. No equipment beyond a match and whatever the kitchen threw out that evening. He piles waste under a tree and sets it smoldering. Within 2 to 4 weeks, that tree will flower out of season against its natural cycle, and it can induce a massive off-season bloom, shifting its natural cycle to match peak market demands. Filipino farmers call this pagpapaus okay. It means smoking. The technique has been practiced for at least 200 years across the mango-growing provinces of the Philippines, Zambales, Pangasinan, Ilocos Sur, and the island of Guimaras. Guimaras is famous for producing the sweetest mangoes in the entire country. On Guimaras, the smudging tradition is so deeply embedded that families time their burns by the season and the weather. Grandparents taught parents, parents taught children. No printed manual, no extension officer standing in the grove explaining why it works. Just fire and observation handed down across 10 generations of families whose livelihoods rose and fell with the size of the mango harvest. Mango is the national fruit of the Philippines. The industry generates hundreds of millions of dollars annually, and the foundational technique behind its most productive seasons is a pile of kitchen garbage and a match that costs nothing. Halfway around the world along the Tana River in eastern Kenya, a completely separate group of farmers arrived at the same knowledge independently. Smallholder mango growers in the Tana River region smoke-treat their trees to push early flowering. The early fruit reaches Kenyan markets weeks ahead of the main season glut. Off-season mangoes sell for 2 to 3 times the normal price. A free technique performed with dead leaves and food scraps transforms subsistence farming into real household income. Families that were surviving are now earning. 2 continents, same species of tree, same smoke, same outcome. No communication between Filipino and Kenyan farmers. No shared agricultural textbook. No conference connecting Zambales province to the Tana River Valley. The knowledge appeared independently because the chemistry behind it is universal. The trees were already built to respond to what the fire produces. All the farmers had to do was pay attention long enough to notice. 200 years of documented results, zero scientific understanding of why it worked. The farmers never needed to understand. The trees flowered, the fruit set, the harvest tripled. That was enough. But in 2003, a brush fire on the other side of the planet burned the explanation into the ground. After major bushfires sweep through the Australian landscape, something remarkable happens in the weeks that follow. Plant species that have not germinated in 20 or 30 years suddenly erupt from the blackened earth. Entire hillsides shift from gray ash to vivid green in a matter of weeks. Seedlings that no one planted appear by the millions in soil that looked completely lifeless days earlier. After the devastating fires near Canberra in 2003, researchers watched species emerge that had not appeared in the area for decades. The standard explanation had always been heat. Scientists assumed fire cracked tough seed coats and triggered mechanical germination. But controlled experiments applying heat alone without any smoke produced almost no response. Heat was not the answer. Something invisible inside the smoke itself was waking the seeds. In 2004, a team of researchers in Western Australia isolated the molecule. They named it karrikinolide. The word comes from karrik, a Noongar Aboriginal term meaning smoke. The Noongar people of southwestern Australia had practiced deliberate landscape burning for over 50,000 years. They called it fire stick farming. They understood that controlled burns made the land more productive long before any Western laboratory existed to measure why. It took modern science until 2004 to explain the chemistry behind what Aboriginal Australians had known since before recorded history began. Karrikinolide triggers germination at concentrations of 1 part per billion, 1/1000th, a quantity so small no human instrument can taste or smell it, but the plant detects it instantly. The compound activates a receptor that already exists inside the plant tissue. That receptor sits dormant for years or decades doing nothing, waiting for smoke to arrive. The plant was designed to respond to fire. It was built with the lock already installed. Karrikinolide is simply the key. Since that discovery, karrikin responses have been confirmed in over 1,200 species across more than 80 plant genera. Fruit trees, food crops, wild grasses, ornamental flowers. This is not some narrow, exotic reaction limited to Australian wildflowers. It is one of the most universal chemical triggers in the entire plant kingdom. But karrikins are only half the story. There's a second compound hiding in the same smoke, doing something entirely different. When organic material smolders, it releases a gas called ethylene. Ethylene is one of the 5 major plant hormones. Every plant on Earth already produces it internally to regulate its own development. But fruit trees react to external ethylene in a specific and dramatic way. It converts vegetative buds into flower buds. It commands the tree to stop investing energy in leaves and start producing fruit immediately. This is exactly what Filipino smudging does. The smoldering kitchen scraps release ethylene gas. The gas drifts up into the mango canopy. The tree receives it as a direct chemical instruction to flower. 200 years of Filipino tradition explained by a single invisible molecule rising from a pile of burning vegetable peels. In South Africa, the connection was confirmed from yet another direction. The Cape floristic region surrounding Cape Town contains over 9,000 plant species, and the vast majority require fire or smoke exposure to reproduce at all. Seeds in the fynbos biome lie dormant in the soil for 20 years or longer, simply waiting for a burn. Scientists at Kirstenbosch National Botanical Garden created smoke water by bubbling combustion smoke through liquid. That liquid germinated species that had resisted every other horticultural treatment for decades. The same chemistry that opens mango blossoms in the Philippines breaks 30-year seed dormancy in South African soil. 1,200 species, 3 continents, 1 free compound produced by any fire anywhere on Earth. So naturally, they made it illegal. Now here is where the story turns. In the United States, open burning of household waste and yard debris is restricted or prohibited under the Clean Air Act. State and local burn ordinances reinforce this in nearly every county. Fines range from $200 to several $1,000s depending on the jurisdiction. In the European Union, the Waste Framework Directive restricts open burning across all member states. Most countries enforce local bans backed by financial penalties. In Australia, the country where karrikins were literally discovered through bushfire research, domestic and agricultural burning is restricted across the majority of states and territories. And in the Philippines itself, Republic Act No. 8749, the Clean Air Act of 1999, technically prohibits open burning. The nation that invented pagpapausok has now outlawed it on its own soil. The stated reason is always AIR quality, particulate emissions, respiratory health. Consider what replaced the smoke. The Philippine Bureau of Plant Industry and International Agricultural Extension Services now recommend a synthetic product called ethylene, sold under the brand name Ethrel. It is a manufactured chemical that releases ethylene when sprayed onto tree tissue. It ships in plastic bottles from chemical plants. It requires precise dilution ratios and protective equipment during application. It costs money, and it must be repurchased every single season. In regions where ethylene is too expensive, farmers turn to calcium carbide, an industrial compound that releases acetylene gas as a crude ethylene substitute. Classified as hazardous material in most countries, banned for direct food contact in many nations, still widely used because families in the developing world simply cannot afford the branded alternative. Synthetic fertilizers fill the remaining gap. Petroleum-derived nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium sold in printed bags at garden centers and agricultural supply depots to restore soil fertility that a free process maintained on its own for centuries. The global crop protection chemical market exceeds $70 billion per year. The plant growth regulator segment alone generates billions annually. Ethanol cannot be produced in a kitchen. It requires industrial synthesis and licensed distribution. Every season, the farmer buys a new bottle. Every season, the company records another sale. A pile of kitchen scraps cannot be patented. A smoldering fire cannot be trademarked. A compound that forms spontaneously whenever organic matter burns cannot generate licensing revenue. A technique that costs nothing does not participate in the agricultural input economy. What does not participate gets regulated, gets replaced, gets forgotten within one generation. This is not conspiracy. This is economics. The same structure that buried perilla oil behind fish oil capsules for decades. The same pattern that pulled clover out of lawn seed mixes and sold you fertilizer to replace what clover provided for free. The incentive never changes, so the outcome never changes either. But the chemistry does not care about regulations. Here is what actually happens when kitchen scraps burn under a fruit tree. When organic material smolders beneath a damp layer of green matter, it does not combust fully. Starved of oxygen, it chars instead of burning. The result is a substance called biochar, a stable carbon structure riddled with millions of microscopic pores. Those pores hold water. They trap dissolved nutrients. They shelter beneficial soil bacteria and mycorrhizal fungi. A single application of biochar increases the water-holding capacity of surrounding soil by up to 18%. And the material does not decompose. It does not wash away in the rain. It persists in the ground for hundreds of years, sometimes thousands. In the Amazon basin, indigenous peoples created what researchers call terra preta, dark earth. For over 2,000 years, communities along the Amazon River worked charcoal, crushed bone, and decomposed organic waste into tropical clay. Those terra preta soils remain among the most fertile on the planet today. Thousands of years after the people who built them stopped tending the land, the charcoal is still there, still holding moisture, still feeding microbial colonies, still producing vigorous crops on soil that without it would barely support weeds. Now connect the three pieces. When a farmer in Guimaras lights a pile of scraps beneath a mango tree, the smoldering mass does three things simultaneously. It releases ethylene gas that drifts into the canopy and commands the tree to flower. It generates karrikins that activate dormant germination pathways in over 1,200 plant species, including companion crops and ground cover beneath the canopy. And the charred residue left after the smoke clears is biochar that permanently improves soil structure, water retention, and mineral availability around the root zone. Three compounds from one fire: ethylene for flowering, karrikins for germination, biochar for soil fertility that outlasts the farmer who made it. Every time someone struck a match beneath a fruit tree, they were performing three agricultural interventions at once without understanding any of them. The fruit itself reflects the difference. Trees growing in biochar-enriched soil absorb more potassium, phosphorus, calcium, and magnesium from the ground. Those minerals show up directly in the harvested fruit. Higher vitamin C, greater mineral density. Smoke-treated trees that flower under ethylene stimulus often produce fruit with elevated sugar content because ethylene changes how the tree distributes its stored carbohydrates between wood, leaves, and fruit. The harvest is not just bigger, it is measurably more nutritious. Three functions, one match, and you can start with what is sitting in your kitchen right now. If open burning is restricted where you live, that does not make this knowledge useless. The compounds do not care how they are delivered. They only need to reach the tree. There are clean methods that produce identical results without violating a single regulation in any jurisdiction. First, contained smudging. This is the Filipino technique adapted for a modern backyard. You need a metal drum, a chimenea, or a fire pit with a fitted lid. Collect kitchen scraps through the week. Vegetable peels, coffee grounds, eggshells, fruit rinds, leftover rice, any organic household waste. Place dry leaves or straw at the bottom as kindling. Light it. Once the material is burning, smother the pile with damp green matter, fresh cut grass, wet leaves. Close the lid partway. The goal is thick smoke and no visible flame, low oxygen and slow combustion. Position the container beneath the canopy of the fruit tree you want to trigger. Let the smoke drift upward through the branches for 30 minutes to 1 hour. Repeat once per week for 2 to 3 consecutive weeks before the window when you want the tree to flower. This works reliably on mangoes and a select few tropical plants. However, temperate fruit trees like apples, pears, peaches, and cherries rely primarily on winter chill hours to break dormancy, and exposing them to heavy smoke can actually cause their buds to drop. Do not throw away the char left in the drum after each session. Rake it into the soil around the drip line of the tree. That residue is your biochar. It is permanent fertilizer that will improve your soil for longer than you will live in that house. Second, smoke water. This was developed from South African fine-boss research and adapted for home gardening. You need 2 metal containers and a length of tubing or hose. Burn organic scraps in the first container. Route the smoke through the tube into the second container, which holds water. The active compounds dissolve into the liquid as the smoke bubbles through. Strain the water. Dilute 1 part smoke water to 10 parts clean water. Spray the solution directly onto the canopy, branches, and soil around the root zone of any fruit tree. The concentrate stores for months in a sealed dark container. No open flame anywhere near your trees. Legal in every jurisdiction on Earth. Water-soluble compounds like karrikins dissolve into the liquid, making an excellent drench to wake up stubborn seeds. Third, biochar soil amendment. This is the slow strategy for gardeners focused on building soil fertility over years rather than triggering immediate bloom. Collect char from any contained fire you build. Crush it into small fragments. Soak those fragments in compost tea or diluted urine for 48 hours before applying. This charging step is essential. Raw biochar added directly to soil can temporarily bind available nitrogen and starve the plants around it. Soaking loads the pores with nutrients first and eliminates that risk completely. Work the charged biochar into the top 6 inches of soil around the drip line of your fruit trees. One application lasts for centuries. Within a single growing season, the pores colonize with beneficial microbes. Water retention improves. Nutrient access increases permanently. You will never need to reapply. Somewhere tonight, a gardener is standing under fluorescent lights in a garden center aisle. Synthetic bloom inducers in plastic bottles on one shelf, bags of petroleum-derived soil amendment on another, a spray bottle of ethylene behind the counter at $15 to $30 per application, a bag of chemical fertilizer at $12 to $20. Every product on those shelves was engineered in a laboratory to replicate something that forms naturally when organic matter meets a flame. And in the kitchen of every house on that street, tonight's vegetable peels are being scraped off cutting boards into plastic bags. The bags knotted shut, dropped into trash cans, wheeled to the curb, trucked to a landfill where they will decompose in darkness without fire, without smoke, without karrikins, without ethylene, without ever reaching the soil beneath the fruit tree standing 10 feet from the kitchen window.